Welcome to CarmenERichards.com, and thanks for joining me today at Carmen's Book Corner. Our guest today is Jerry B. Jenkins, author of 189 books and New York Times bestseller list author. And mostly today, he's my friend. And I appreciate you being here, Jerry. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Carmen. Great to be with you.
Today, I'm really excited because we're going to talk about your newest novel, a little bit about that, and then we may talk a little bit about the writing craft. And I'm excited to share with you his new book, which is called The Valley of the Dry Bones. So let's get started. The Valley of the Dry Bones. It's an amazing story with quite an interesting setting. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad you read it. You know, I was mentioning to you earlier that so often, we writers get interviewed by the press or by, general market radio or television, and they don't have time to read the book, or they have an assistant read it or skim it. So it's always great to talk to somebody that's actually read the book. And this book is set in California 10 years into the future. And I speculate what that would look like if the current drought, which is about 7 years old now and starting to dissipate, but had that continued, and during the final 10 years, leading up to this book, there was literally no rain. And I consulted with hydrologists and scientists out there. And my son used to work in Hollywood. And so whenever we would visit the family, we might be there on days they could water their lawn or might not be able to, or they encourage them to take short showers or not use, the tap water for drinking water, etc. So I said, what would this look like if the drought continued and really never abated? And this consultant said, if it went as far as you say, if you went 10 years without any rain, the state would be uninhabitable and it would have to be condemned. Nobody could live here. And so, needless to say, that was, perfect for a novelist's crazy brain. And I just started playing with that. So that's the setting for the Valley of the Dry Bones. And then, as people of faith, we often hear messages about, who will go and serve, the needy or the lost or the, whatever disenfranchised population needs the message or needs our help. And this book, I have a pastor who is in a church in Torrance, California, and the state's been condemned. The government's going to move everybody out. There's 39 million people. Everybody has to go. And this pastor says, not everybody can go. There's going to be maybe 1% of the population who can't afford to or doesn't know how to, go through the logistics or just is unable to leave. And so his challenge to his congregation is who will stay. Right. And so my cast of characters are people in that group who call themselves the holdouts, and they decide to stay, which causes all kinds of complications because, as you know from reading it, they have to live underground, they have to find water and food where they can, and they have to make their own fuel and that type of thing. So I sort of see this as the Walking Dead meets Left Behind.
Oh, see, there you go. That was going to be one of my questions. How would you pitch this to a movie producer? First lines are so important, and you taught me that they are. They're the hook. And so I loved the first line in your book. I'm going to read it really quick. Katashi Aki backed the beastly sanitation truck through the same gate of the same parking lot of the same building of the same industrial park. He and his partner had served for more than 3 years, but he was running half an hour late because Raul was taking a sick day and couldn't leap out to guide him to the bins or shoo away the kids who even now scrambling over the chain link fence to climb the truck. Okay, so that's 2 sentences, but nonetheless, you had me at hello. I mean, as soon as I read that, I just went, oh, this is going to be awesome. Not only do you do a great first line, there's this inciting incident that then leads into the rest of the story, and that's the case here in the Valley of the Dry Bones. Is that something you do all the time in all of your fiction?
Yeah, I think it's important, and I teach this, that there has to be an upsetting of the status quo at least. And people hear me talk about the classic story structure where you plunge your main character into terrible trouble as soon as possible, and then everything he does to try to fix it makes it worse. And just when it gets to look hopeless by what he's done previously to try to get out of all these situations, he's learned. And so with that character arc, then he wins or loses in the end by fighting it out for himself. But you need that inciting incident very early. Someone just sent me their new novel, and I looked at the first paragraph, and it says that he woke up on a typical day for a person in his profession. And I'm thinking, wow, I can't wait to read on. And there needs to be something early that gets that engine rolling. That's the inciting incident.
Is that something that you? I know that you're a pantser by your own type of writer. Is that something that you, when you sit down to write your first sentence or your first whatever, is that something that just you've already thought about, or it just comes to you right then, or is it something you go back and edit into later on?
That's a good question, because a lot of people say, if you're a pantser, do you literally sit down in front of a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and just start from scratch? I would say most of us pantsers, people who write by the seat of our pants, according to Stephen King, who's the king of those, he says, put interesting people in difficult situations and write to find out what happens. So you at least have to know something about who's your character going to be, maybe not fully fleshed out, and then what what the difficult situation is. So when I started to write this, I wanted to set it in this dystopian California 10 years from now, and I had a hero in mind, a main character in mind, and then the rest of it sort of comes as you write. But yeah, you do sit down and say, what's the best way to kick this off, to grab that reader by the throat and not let go.
Right. And the characters, speaking of the characters, are really interesting. To me, you have 16 holdouts in the Torrance area. It's like a microcosm of the church.
Yeah, and I have to say that didn't come to me in advance, or I didn't outline it that way, but and I wasn't necessarily trying for a United Nations feel either. I mean, sometimes we sort of force that, where we've got somebody of every race and creed and color and walk of life. I just thought, well, what kind of people would you need there? It's in a situation to have a physician, and he would have a family. And my main character has a wife and daughter, and we have the older couple that's the pastor and his wife. And so, that mix seemed to work. And once I could sort of settle on those people, they emerge and they say things, and they sometimes surprise me. That's one of the things about being a pantser and writing as a process of discovery. Sometimes people write to me and say, why did you kill off my favorite character? And I say, I didn't kill him off. I found him dead. I was at the point as you were. But I think it's important when you write like this to make sure that it's organic and that it makes sense and that you're intuitively plotting, even if you're not outlining it in advance.
Right. Zeke describes his wife, Alexis, with just beautiful terms. How much of you is inside of Zeke? And how you feel about Dianna, etc.
There are probably parts of me in every character. I remember my late mother used to be asked this all the time. She said, "Do you see Jerry in his characters, in any of the books or any of the main characters?" And she said, "I see him in every character." Well, that's fairly insightful for a mother, but I have to be the person I'm writing about, even if it's the villain. I have to say, how would I respond in this situation? And your question earlier about who did I write it for? I am an inspirational writer, and I'm writing for a Christian publisher, and it's being, that's the base. It's going to be sold mainly in Christian bookstores, but because of the visibility and success of my biographies and the Left Behind series, it'll be everywhere. And so I try to keep that in mind, even though it's Christian characters and they have a definite, Christian message and mission. I try to keep in mind that there will be people reading this who don't share that view at all, and I want them to at least be aware of what Christians think like and what they're doing, and the fact that they're not perfect either. They're flawed characters, but they're real. And so I wrote it for that market, and yet I wrote Left Behind for that market too, and it became the biggest crossover phenomenon ever. So I never think I'm just writing this for Christians. I am writing it for people who pretty much understand our milieu, but I want to be careful in the writing that somebody on the outside might look at this and say, that's interesting. sort of, I want them to feel sort of the way I did when I watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I didn't have any association with the Greek Orthodox faith, but I identified with it because it was an outsider coming in. It was the traditionalist saying, "Do we trust this guy?" And we love our daughter. And that's the reason the thing was so popular, is everybody could identify with it, whether they understood that milieu or not.
Right, and that's how I felt when I was reading it. I thought, boy, everybody can identify with this book. They can find themselves in one of the characters somewhere. Zeke is your main character. I thought he was completely heroic. Loved him, and
well, that answers your question about whether that's me or not.
Oh,
yeah, I always want to be the hero. But I'm
the hero. That's what I want to know.
I'm not the right demographic anymore, so my hero can't be a senior citizens guy who's sitting off in the corner writing books. So my hero here is 40, 41, 42, and married for a good long time and has a teenage daughter. So I try to identify with him, and it's fun at my age to identify with somebody that age. But I think what he has in common with me mostly is he's a romantic. When you talk about how he talks about his wife, his wife doesn't look like my wife. My wife is sort of a classic beauty, and of course now she's a senior citizen like I am. But this girl, because of where she lived and her profession and that type of thing, has a whole different look. But he sees her, in spite of lines in her face or the dryness of the sun, what it's done to her hair or her skin. He sees the person, and that so that part of him is me for sure. The romantic part, yeah. Which
is what I thought was so beautiful, especially with marriage. I mean, I know you and Dianna have been married since '71. Is that what you told me?
People will find out we've been married 45 years, and they say, to the same person, And I'm happy to say, no, we're not the same people we were 45 years ago. So that's what makes it fun, is that we get to meet the new iterations of each other every decade or so. We were different before we were parents, and now we're grandparents, and there's all those things that go into it. So it's sad that long-term marriages seem to be rare these days, but people ought to try it. There's nothing like it.
I agree with that. Okay, so in the book, you talk about, the Valley of the Dry Bones, and the cover has, a really deserty caked floor and some water going on here. There's a correlation there between water and the word. And I found that as these guys were living in these extreme circumstances, they were really missionaries. They were really there to serve the people that were left behind in California. No pun intended. Anyway, so water and the word, is there a correlation that you intended, or did it just happen?
Well, really a little of both. I didn't intend it. I was aware of it. And I want to be careful not to make too much of it so that it'd be too obvious of a sermon or an object lesson. But because of my worldview, I love those kind of metaphors. And also, my books are always going to end with hope. That I don't want them to be tied up in a neat bow and they all lived happily ever after and their kids grew up to be missionaries and all that type of thing. But there's definitely hope. And I was aware too that as these people are, as the holdouts are there trying to reach out to a Native American tribe and to other indigents, they are giving life, and they're giving, from a spiritual sense, life-giving water. Jesus tells the woman at the well that people who drink of him will never thirst again. So I'm aware of all that as I'm writing, but I'm trying not to make it an over-obvious sermon.
And I know that you have grandkids who are adopted, and you have 3 sons. And so you say your characters, you didn't want to make them be too, just for the sake of being different. But it was a melting pot, and I think it was true to the state of California. California is a big melting pot. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And that's one thing we noticed when we visit my son and daughter-in-law and the kids out there. They were involved in a startup church in a storefront in Venice Beach. And they had everybody from, well-to-do people from a big church who wanted to help out to people who actually walked in off the street high, disheveled, hardly dressed sometimes. So they had the entire gamut, and of course, all races and all creeds and all faiths, and they basically said we're not making an issue of the differences. we're holding up Christ and Scripture, and just let it do its thing. And boy, it was an impactful place. So that, I had that in mind as well.
Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I just thought it really ministered to me, and I'm excited to pass it on to my husband. He's a better reader than me, and so he's really going to enjoy this book, and I'm excited to give it to him.